What if the most dangerous moment in a financial system is not when prices explode, but when control quietly slips away? This week, no market crashed, no circuit breakers tripped, yet something fundamental changed. Silver inventories drained at a pace not seen in over 40 years. Banks stopped offering physical metal. And behind the scenes, mechanisms designed to contain stress failed to contain anything at all. That's when you know the story isn't about price anymore. It's about control. To understand why this moment matters, we need to step back, not days or months, but decades. For most of modern history, silver was not just a commodity, it was money. Until 1965, US coins were still made with real silver. When governments abandoned precious metals for paper currency, silver didn't disappear. It was simply reassigned. From money to industrial input, from store of value to raw material. At the same time, a new layer of control was built on top of physical markets, paper markets. Futures contracts were introduced to stabilize prices, hedge risk, and provide liquidity. In theory, a futures contract represents a promise, silver delivered at a future date. In practice, most contracts are never settled with real metal. They are rolled over, netted out, or closed in cash. This created a quiet but crucial shift. Price discovery moved away from physical supply and into financial instruments. By the late 20th century, this system had already been stress tested once. In 1980, the Hunt brothers attempted to corner the silver market by demanding physical delivery. Prices surged, and then the rules changed. COMEX introduced emergency measures, famously restricting purchases while allowing only sales. The price collapsed. Control was restored. That episode taught regulators an important lesson. Markets can be managed, as long as paper promises outnumber physical claims. But today's environment is fundamentally different. Silver demand is no longer driven primarily by investors or jewelers. It is driven by solar panels, electric vehicles, medical devices, 5G infrastructure, and defense systems. Unlike financial demand, industrial demand does not pause when prices are inconvenient. And unlike 1980, global supply cannot respond quickly. Around 70% of silver production comes as a byproduct of copper and zinc mining. You can't simply turn on silver production without rebuilding entire mining operations. This is why recent developments feel different, not louder, not more chaotic, just harder to control. At the center of this story is a simple imbalance, one that has been building quietly for years. In 2024, global industrial demand for silver reached approximately 680.5 million ounces. Mining supply, however, failed to keep pace. The result was a structural deficit of nearly 149 million ounces in a single year. This wasn't caused by a sudden shock or a temporary disruption. It was the outcome of long-term constraints that are now impossible to ignore. Unlike oil or agricultural commodities, silver production is unusually rigid. Roughly 70% of all silver mined worldwide is produced as a byproduct of copper, zinc, and lead mining. That means silver output depends not on silver prices, but on the economics of entirely different metals. Even if silver prices were to double, producers cannot quickly scale supply without opening new base metal mines, a process that takes 10 to 15 years, billions in capital, and regulatory approval. Meanwhile, known high-grade silver deposits have been steadily declining. Ore grades are lower, energy costs are higher, environmental restrictions are tighter. Recycling helps, but it cannot close gaps of this magnitude. This is the critical point. The supply side is not responding because it cannot respond. And when supply becomes inflexible, control mechanisms built for flexible markets begin to lose their effectiveness. If supply is rigid, demand has become relentless. Silver is no longer optional in modern industry. It is embedded. Each solar panel requires silver for its conductive paste. Electric vehicles use silver in battery management systems, power electronics, and charging infrastructure. Data centers, 5G antennas, medical devices, and advanced weapons systems all depend on silver's unmatched electrical and thermal properties. There is no perfect substitute, only compromises. By 2024, industrial use alone accounted for the majority of total silver consumption. And unlike investor demand, Industrial demand does not retreat when prices rise. Production schedules, government contracts, and energy targets lock it in. This is where the story turns strategic. In late 2024 and early 2025, inventories at the Shanghai Futures Exchange reportedly fell by 86%. At the same time, roughly 660 metric tons of silver were rushed out of Asia and sent to London, a market long considered the backbone of global physical supply. That transfer was not about profit, it was about priority. When London's vaults began tightening, silver didn't flow toward the highest bidder. It flowed toward the system that needed to keep functioning. Solar manufacturing lines cannot pause, defense programs cannot wait, and governments do not like discovering too late that a critical input is missing. This is what strategic demand looks like: quiet, decisive, and indifferent to price. And it places extraordinary pressure on any system still pretending that paper claims can substitute for physical metal. For decades, stability in the silver market depended on one assumption: that paper claims would always outnumber physical demands. On exchanges like COMEX, a single ounce of silver can be represented by 100 to 400 paper contracts. These contracts trade liquidity, not metal. As long as most participants settle in cash, the system functions. Prices are guided by leverage, not by vaults. This imbalance is not accidental. It is the control mechanism. When pressure builds, exchanges and regulators have historically relied on emergency tools: margin hikes, trading halts, position limits. In 1980, when physical delivery threatened the system, COMEX famously changed the rules overnight, banning purchases while allowing sales. Prices collapsed. Control was restored. That playbook became known, informally, as a kind of kill switch, a last resort lever to stop a market from breaking away from paper control. But today, something is different. Raising margins does nothing when buyers are not speculators. Halting trades does nothing when metal is being removed from vaults. Cash settlement means little when counterparties want delivery. This time, the pressure is not coming from price charts. It's coming from empty space in warehouses. And a kill switch designed to slow trading cannot create silver that isn't there. When markets stop behaving, governments step in. Not loudly, strategically. China offers the clearest example. In recent years, Beijing has moved to restrict private access to precious metals, quietly classifying silver as a material of strategic importance. At the same time, silver has been incorporated into state reserve frameworks alongside energy resources and rare earth elements. Official statements remain vague, but the direction is unmistakable: priority over price. This mirrors a pattern already familiar in other sectors. China controls roughly 70% of global rare earth mining and over 90% of refining capacity. When export restrictions were introduced, global supply chains felt the impact almost immediately. Silver, though less visible, plays a similarly critical role in energy transition and defense. South Korea followed a different path. In February 2025, 4 major banks suspended retail silver sales altogether. No explanation was offered, but the timing aligned precisely with tightening global inventories. When banks stop selling a commodity, it is rarely because demand is weak. Russia, meanwhile, remains effectively excluded from the London bullion system, reducing available Western supply further. Taken together, these moves suggest coordination, or at least convergence. Not to push prices higher, but to secure access before control slips away. Geopolitics, in this context, is not about ideology. It's about who gets metal when there isn't enough to go around. To understand where this leads, it helps to compare silver with other resources that once appeared ordinary, until they weren't. Rare earth elements are the obvious parallel. For years, they were treated as low-value industrial inputs. Prices were stable. Supply chains were global. Then, reality intervened. When China consolidated control over around 70% of global mining and more than 90% of refining, the market stopped remembering price and started remembering dependency. Export limits didn't need to be absolute. Even small restrictions reshaped entire industries. Silver is following a similar trajectory, but with an added complication. It still trades inside a financialized pricing system. The gold-silver ratio illustrates this tension. Historically, the ratio averaged around 69.1. In recent periods, it has hovered near 79.1, sometimes higher. On paper, this suggests silver is undervalued. In physical terms, it suggests something else entirely. Price is no longer the primary signal. Availability is. This disconnect becomes dangerous when paper markets claim stability while physical markets tighten. On COMEX, for example, total open interest often represents multiples of registered inventory. Under normal conditions, this is manageable. Only a small percentage of contracts ever demand delivery. But consider a simple scenario. What if just 10% of contract holders request physical settlement? The system does not bend, it breaks. Warehouses cannot deliver metal they do not have. Exchanges resort to cash settlement. Legal frameworks are invoked, and trust, once questioned, does not easily return. The consequences ripple outward. Manufacturers face supply uncertainty and rising costs. Green energy projects miss targets. Defense procurement timelines stretch. Smaller economies without reserves find themselves priced out or sidelined. Meanwhile, nations and institutions with early access consolidate advantage quietly. This is not a collapse in the dramatic sense. There are no sirens, no single failure point. What emerges instead is a two-tier market, one where price exists on screens and another where metal moves by allocation and priority. In such systems, rules still exist. They simply stop applying equally. And that is the moment when control, once centralized, begins to fragment. When control mechanisms weaken, systems adapt, or they fracture. What happens next depends on choices made now by governments, industries, and individuals. For governments, the priority is no longer price stability, but supply assurance. That means greater transparency around strategic reserves, incentives for domestic refining and recycling, and long-term contracts that secure material flows outside volatile spot markets. Some countries will move faster than others. History suggests those who delay will pay a premium later. Industries face a harder reality. Reducing silver use without sacrificing performance is possible in theory, but substitution remains limited. Recycling will expand, but it cannot scale quickly enough to offset structural deficits. For manufacturers, the challenge is not cost alone, it is continuity. Investors, meanwhile, are forced to confront a distinction that paper markets blurred for decades: exposure versus ownership. Contracts, ETFs, and derivatives offer price exposure, but they do not guarantee access when access matters most. Physical silver does not promise liquidity, it promises availability. Looking ahead, three broad price scenarios emerge. In a base case where governments manage inventories carefully and paper markets hold together, analysts such as Bank of America project silver reaching $75 to $100 per ounce by 2026. In a higher stress scenario where delivery pressure escalates and confidence in paper settlement erodes, prices could move toward $120 to $170. Not as speculation, but as rationing. A lower price scenario is also possible if major holders release strategic reserves. But that option, once used, cannot be repeated indefinitely. Each path carries trade-offs. None restore the old assumptions. The question is no longer whether silver will remain cheap, but who will have access when it matters. What we are witnessing is not a sudden crisis, but a familiar pattern reaching its later stage. First, a system is built, one that works as long as confidence holds. Then it is optimized, leveraged, and managed. Next, supply tightens quietly while rules are adjusted to preserve control. History suggests a fourth stage follows: fragmentation. Today, silver appears to be entering stage 3. Cumulative deficits are approaching 820 million ounces. Physical inventories are thinning, and mechanisms designed to contain stress are proving less effective than before. This does not mean collapse is imminent. It means the margin for error is shrinking. Each cycle rewards those who prepare early and penalizes those who assume the rules will always protect them. The question facing viewers is not ideological or technical. It is practical. Do you hold silver as a line on a statement, as a claim on a promise, or not at all? Because when rules change again, they reminded us this week that they can access, not price, may decide outcomes. If you want to follow how this unfolds, consider staying with the channel. The next phase rarely announces itself.